Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
How could anyone thrive, much less survive, in a poisoned world? Mission Evolution Radio Show is coming to you around the world on the Exxon Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. With us this hour to discuss protecting our health in a chemical world is Dr. Aly Cohen. Dr. Cohen is triple board certified in rheumatology, internal medicine, and integrative medicine, as well as environmental health expert in Princeton, New Jersey. She's on the faculty of the Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine, where she created and manages the environmental curriculum for medical colleges. Dr. Cohen has collaborated with environmental working groups and other disease prevention organizations. She's a legal medical expert for toxic tort environmental exposure cases. She's the author of Non-Toxic Guide to Living Healthy in a Chemical World, Integrative Environmental Medicine, and her latest book, Detoxify, the Everyday Toxins Harming Your Immune System and How to Defend Against Them. Her website, thesmarthuman.com. Dr. Cohen, thanks so much for joining us on Mission Evolution.
Thank you so much for having me, Gwilda.
Well, it's a real pleasure, and this is such a important topic in these days. So, in addition to your other very impressive credentials, you're an environmental health expert. How'd you get involved in this topic and area of medicine?
Well, actually, I'm staring right at my dog right now, but this story comes from being a lover of dogs. And my first dog before this dog was a golden retriever and got sick. And as I was exploring many of the things that could have contributed to his autoimmune hepatitis, which was a very unusual diagnosis 15 years ago when I was involved with all of this, I really was learning a lot about not just what could have made him sick, but what could be making humans sick. And again, as a rheumatologist, seeing my dog with an autoimmune disease was really shocking and jarring. And it really opened up my eyes to a whole area of exploration that really brought me to this day.
So how old was your dog when he came down with this, or she?
So he was about 4.5 years of age, golden retriever, full of life, and then really started to slow down. And we thought, the dog had swallowed something as typical of Goldens and Labs. And when we took him to the vet, it turns out he had not only jaundice, but he had a liver that had gotten to the size of a golf ball. It had shrunk in size due to his autoimmune condition. And this is a condition that's not only rare in dogs, but particularly rare in golden retrievers, as we found out. And so we ended up, trying to do our best to keep him alive and keep him comfortable, but he did pass away. But that was such a heartbreak to me. As a young mom at the time, I was just really beside myself. And as I looked into his drinking water quality, we live on a farm. Was it, perhaps pesticides that are sprayed nearby? Perhaps it was the rubber plastic toy that never left his mouth even while he slept. Dog food, could it have been contaminated? Could it have been his flea and tick medication? And as I started looking through all these different topics, looking for answers, again, it opened up a world of environmental health, something I was never taught in med school, and really started to play into everything I was seeing with humans in my office.
Well, that's amazing. The dog left a heck of a legacy, didn't he?
He did. I actually really do attribute a lot of my work to his life and passing, believe it or not.
Oh, I can believe it. I'm a dog lover myself. So, Dr. Aly, what are toxic chemicals?
So there are lots of ways to classify synthetic human-made chemicals. And, this has exploded in terms of the numbers of really just industrial chemicals that we use in cosmetics and personal care products, on paint, in solvents, on, cookware to make them non-stick, on clothes to make them, waterproof or grease-proof, on couch sprays. But things that even would, be in our food, for instance, the food industry and all of the synthetic chemicals that are added to mostly processed and ultra processed foods. We now have about 14,000 of those chemicals. So we have lots and lots of chemicals that are now in our environment, what we eat, what we put on our skin, what we breathe in our homes, such as air fresheners and cleaners. And so there's lots of ways to categorize them. You can categorize them by function. Are they used for, again, grease-proof, stain guard, antimicrobials for various reasons? Or can you categorize them by the harm they may, pose in terms of the science that is available? And because manufacturing in the U.S., particularly the U.S. as compared to many other countries who do a better job of this, do not require testing for safety or toxicity on any of these chemicals that go into the market, into our U.S. market for products, which is, again, very hard for people to actually hear that. But it is true. There is no required testing for safety or toxicity of any of these chemicals that go into our food, into our cosmetics, personal care, cleaning. Because of that, we have only data from third-party academic, international research that shows whether many of these chemicals are now found to be toxic to the human body. And that is where I like to put my focus on, is the evidence-based information around what we now know. And what we now know is that many toxins, many of the chemicals that could be classified as toxic to the human body, have effects on the cellular level of human activity, including hormones and hormone production, hormone creation, hormone breakdown, hormone signaling, but also what I like to focus on now with my new book especially is the immune system, and how this may predispose us to not just inflammatory changes of the body, but also increase our risk for developing an epidemic of what we now see of autoimmune and immune disorders.
I mean, those have been rising like crazy, haven't they? And I have a question for you here. You were mentioning how the chemicals haven't been tested or approved before they just throw them on the market. But then there's so many on the market. Has anybody looked into what's the combination doing to us?
Yeah, you're describing what's called mixture studies, and mixture studies have been undertaken, and we know quite a bit about these mixtures. In fact, it's not just, even the breakdown of some chemicals are shorter than others. We call that a half-life. Some of the chemicals are excreted more efficiently than others. It also depends on the host. Any human being who has maybe comorbidities or chronic kidney disease, liver disease, who's on multiple medications, there's all variations of how we handle the toxic, chemical world that we live in. But, the idea is that we need to kind of get a better idea of where the most chemicals come into our body, and can we reduce those overall? Because the mixtures, because we become kind of a soup of many different exposures over our daily lives, they can actually synergize the effects of those chemicals and make things worse. So it's not just one or two individual chemicals. It's really when we test our blood, our urine, what we're capable of, we can see that there can be additive effects for many of the classes of toxic chemicals that we surround ourselves with.
From what you've seen, how many per person, say for instance, how many chemicals do you find in their blood that don't belong there?
Yeah. So, it's funny. I used to, when I first started learning about this topic, I was very gung-ho about testing myself regularly. I would really do tons of blood testing just to see what was testable, what was recovered by insurance, believe it or not. I wanted to see what I could test patients using their own insurance instead of outside labs. And the testing has gotten better over 10 to 15 years, even in our labs that are covered by insurance. But it turns out that we're pretty chock full of chemicals, and it comes from a variety of reasons. I mean, for instance, we get a load of chemicals from what we eat, because we always are eating, right? So processed food chemicals tend to be pretty high in people who eat those meals on a regular basis. We also have, drinking water contaminants that haven't been fully vetted for all of these chemicals. So we only have about 91 chemicals that are actually vetted, measured at water treatment plants around the country that serve 85% of the U.S. population. So those haven't been updated to, match the number of chemicals coming onto the market. So when we talk about how much people are carrying around in terms of chemicals, really, it's quite a bit. It's a high number. It's various classes of those chemicals. But again, we have really remarkable ways, and this is what I talk about in my book, which is very proactive, of reducing those chemicals in our blood, in our urine, in our breast milk. We have many ways to reduce microplastics, which we've heard a lot about. We have many ways to reduce, chemicals in the air that can cause inflammatory conditions in our lungs, similar to, what we're experiencing with fires out in the West. We have lots of ways to reduce those levels, and I share those with my website, the Smart Human platform, but also really in this book, Detoxify, which I'm really proud of.
So you're saying there's ways to mitigate. Is this outside of just avoidance, but are there also ways to clear out what's already in there?
Yeah, great question. So there's multiple ways. So one of the first ways is to really, again, avoid. We want to avoid chemicals that we now know are harmful, but we need to know which ones those are in order to do that, which I lay out pretty carefully. And then we want to, really think about what we need in the first place. Do we really need a cleaner for our sink, and then a cleaner for our windows, and then a cleaner for our faucet, and then a cleaner for this? We really are over marketed to, and we end up buying a lot more stuff, even cosmetics as well, that we actually don't even really need. And so avoidance through understanding what's toxic, but also just overall reduction is really helpful. Then another aspect, and I teach this in what I call the book, in the book, the 4 A's of environmental health navigation: assess, avoid. The third thing is add, which means adding nutritional components that really offset some of the harmful changes from these exposures. And the fourth A out of the 4 A's is allow, which means there's sort of a wiggle room there to really have life, right? Go to birthday parties, we travel. Sometimes we don't have access to the foods we'd like. So there's lots of allowance so that we can try to stay on track. But essentially, we have avoidance, and we really want to think about what we need. And then we have this nutritional component. And then we have the anthropologic components, which are sweating, exercise, sauna, sleeping, which is so important to reducing those chemicals. So we have multiple different ways to do this. And I try to get people to really think about all those in a very sane and practical way.
So how long have these toxic chemicals been around?
Well, we've had many of these chemicals really at the end of the 18th century, or I should say 19th century, and really about 100 to 200 years maximum where we've had the greatest growth. But the biggest jump in chemical production really came after the 1950s in the United States, when we were really going off to wars. Wars really are an impetus to create a lot of synthetic and industrial chemicals. For instance, we have tons of solvents that have been created just to degrease military machinery, which ends up, believe it or not, getting into our water system, perchloroethylene and trichloroethylene. But we have lots of chemicals that were put into making plexiglass, where that was, used for fighter pilots to make aircraft lighter. We also have chemicals.
We're going to pick up on the list on the other side of a station break. Dr. Cohen and I will return very shortly, so don't you go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org.
Searching through the night, one people, one nation. Searching for the light, one people, one nation. Coming from the stars, one people, one nation. To heal this earth of ours. The end has come, the night has fallen. I have reached the end of days. What's real is not reason.
Are you toxic? With us this hour discussing toxins found in our environment is Dr. Aly Cohen. Dr. Cohen is the author of Non-Toxic: Guide to Living Healthy in a Chemical World. Integrative Environmental Medicine, and her latest book, Detoxify: The Everyday Toxins Harming Your Immune System and How to Defend Against Them. Dr. Aly, we were talking about the chemicals that get into the water from solvents and this and that, and also I was told by a water expert that there's a known carcinogen created when chlorine is mixed with water, that you can filter out the chlorine, but the carcinogens remain. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, you're describing sort of degradation products when, we need, certain public health measures to reduce pestilence. This is one of the greatest, improvements in public health, was to really create a water system that didn't have cholera and some other components of, infection. But with that came the problem of, well, when you add chlorine, you add certain detergents to public drinking water, you're also going to be left with some of the combinations that occur from that, some of the volatile organic compounds that are derived. So I would say to you this: we have a lot more of the contaminants that we don't want in our body than we think of. We don't need to be toxicologists. We don't need to be, super scientific to understand that all of the 95,000, which is kind of the going number of chemicals that now have entered the U.S. market in one way or another, how they get into the water system. What we really want to be thinking, and this has kind of been years in the making of how do you address this big topic, we want to protect our water when it hits our lips, our cup, our home, at the point of use. So in other words, there's going to be all sorts of variability in the water contaminants that are part of the U.S. population and feed our systems. But what we can do is we can manage that variability, but by fixing the problem when it gets to our home. And that has to do with water filtration, which I write a lot about.
So the water filtration, there's as many as you can shake a stick at, and I wonder how many of them are effective. They've got the little pitchers that you pour water into, and then it supposedly filters as you pour it out, or clear down to the reverse osmosis. So are they all created equal, or what do you need to look for there?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And having looked at this for a lot of years now and watched the price points of many of the more aggressive filtration systems come down, I'm pretty comfortable with sharing, some really important information about this. So, most of us, and I am included, have used pitcher filters for a long time in the past, which is, when you're traveling, when you have rental apartments, when you are, on the go, or just because you think that's the sort of the best thing possible. It's typically a pitcher is a carbon block filter system where it's basically a big chunk of carbon, and as water passes through it or over it, it kind of collects some of the contaminants, and then the water runs through it into the pitcher, and that will be your drinking water. Unfortunately, the faster that water goes through any filtration, the more likely it's not removing what it can or should remove. And so then you progress, if you want to get more aggressive with your water cleaning, to something along the lines of a reverse osmosis, which by definition has a pore size so small, it's catching all of the big ticket items coming through the water. It's also doing it in a very slow process. You almost make water while you sleep, so to speak, in a very slow process, because the slower it goes, the more you can remove. And that's what I generally tell people to aim for. Not that everyone needs to go out and get that, but they run very much more expensive than they ever have, around $275. And for a good quality reverse osmosis, they're not perfect, but better. And the idea is that you can have them installed by a plumber, typically around $130 or $150, at least here in New Jersey, for 1 hour. It shouldn't take longer than an hour to have one put in. And it's very convenient because you don't have to do much of filling up. You just let it fill up while you sleep, so to speak. But again, any filtration, I applaud. I love that people are paying attention to this. And I think as people get savvier with their choices, and I try to get people to move along a journey, then that would be a good choice, I think, moving forward.
So there's a lot of filter replacement involved when you have the reverse osmosis?
Actually, it's surprisingly easy. In fact, I change my own filters, and I even record them on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok and Facebook for The Smart Human. I change them every about 6 months. I time them towards, big, holidays like New Year's and Memorial Day is a very good 6-month window. And It's very easy when you change them. They're usually about $30 to change them. So in reality, if you pay the upfront costs for a decent, reverse osmosis and check out vetting ways to vet them, which I do in the book, then you can actually save money because even the change outs are not that expensive compared to a lot of pitchers that run very expensive, actually.
So if it takes out everything, does it also take out the minerals that we do need? And do we need to supplement, or do we get them elsewhere?
So great question, Gwilda. So the idea is that it really works by physics. So it really is taking off anything of a small size because it doesn't know better. The filtration system doesn't necessarily know whether to take off magnesium or calcium or, PFAS and lead and, solvents. So it goes by size. What's so interesting about reverse osmosis, which I find, just a fun fact really, is that my father is a dialysis nephrologist. He's been, managing, he's 85 nephrology patients for, 60 years. And when they brought dialysis to New Jersey, one of the things that he was responsible for knowing and doing is that they use reverse osmosis water for dialysis patients. And the reason was because it catches the smallest single-celled organisms, such as viruses and bacteria, to protect these immune-compromised patients from infection. What they didn't realize back then is that it would also serve well for catching bigger compounds, such as these toxins like lead and mercury and PFAS and those type of things. So now we all have access to that water that is really federally required.
That's fantastic to know. I mean, we know to be careful of our water when we go overseas, but we should probably be equally careful here.
Yeah.
So let's change gears a little bit. What are some of the harmful products that we commonly use in our homes and bodies?
So, some of the more common ones that we can identify, say, for instance, from a food perspective, one of the greatest source of ingestion of bisphenol A, which is a bisphenol, one of many thousands of bisphenol compounds, is that we get that from canned foods, because all canned foods, whether it's, a diet soda or it's an organic can of beans, they are typically almost 99.9%, well, I should say 99.6%. Have bisphenol A lining, which is a plastic coating on the interior that protects the food and drinks from the metal casing. And so bisphenol A, which, many people may know, having, listening to this, was removed from plastic baby bottles in 2012, due largely in part to my co-author for 2 textbooks for Oxford. He was largely responsible for that research, Frederick von Saal. And what we now know is that BPA lining, which is still in canned foods and drinks and even infant formula, is still around, but it has the ability to affect hormone effects. In other words, it can affect the human body as almost a low-level estrogen and also low-level androgen, which are the male hormones, but also insulin, which is a hormone, thyroid hormone, and various other ways that the physiology of hormones work in the human body, which we do not want. And it also, BPA, has the ability to affect the immune system, which I talk quite a bit about in the book. So the idea is that we can change behaviors, such as maybe moving to frozen foods. Frozen organic would be ideal. Fresh foods, grow our own foods, and we can reduce the ingestion of canned foods, and we can do much better with that exposure, which can wash out in about 6 to 8 hour half-life.
I tell you what, that just is so disappointing. A lot of people think they go to the health food store and it's organic, it's safe, but not. And then you wonder about, oh my gosh, you're feeding an infant this stuff that messes with hormones. What does that do to them long term?
Yeah, well, if it was important enough to get out of plastic baby bottles and actually was one of the few chemicals out of maybe 7 to 10 that have ever been removed in the U.S. market, then you can see that it might be something to think about. And again, I'm not an alarmist. I'm really, I color my hair and my kids play, sports on, turf, and this is part of our lives. But the messaging really is you didn't do wrong. There's no regrets. It's how to move forward and make better choices. And so I'm really focused on helping people understand the problem so that they can just kind of slowly and carefully reduce the issues and have, decreased risk for a lot of health issues.
So is it a matter of a cumulative effect? In other words, you can't get away from all of it, but the more you get away from it, the better off you are?
Yeah, it's exactly that. I mean, the thing is that some of these chemicals will stick around in our bodies longer than others, like the perfluoroalkyls that are, sort of nonstick. From our nonstick pans, we should switch to stainless steel type of thing. But, some of them stick around longer, and some of them, like BPA, have a shorter half-life and wash out from the human body, typically in about a 6 to 8 hour half-life period. So it's about a week or so. And the idea is that if you're getting all these exposures, you're not going to know which ones, how much. Life is just too busy, right? But the idea is to take some really big ticket changes. And if you move to these big ticket changes, then you'll start to nuance to get even the smaller changes. I use, for instance, having tea and coffee in the morning as a great example. When you have a habit that you enjoy and that you do regularly, that exposure could be higher than if it's something like a birthday party and going out for birthday cake or traveling for a week once a year. So the idea is that you want to think about your habits and how to tweak your habits. I use, reverse osmosis filtered water. I have a porcelain, cup or glass, stainless steel. You can actually use a French press made of glass and metal. Stainless steel, you can get organic loose leaf tea. You can get organic USDA organic creamer. Cane sugar, you can buy organic coffee. And so when you're doing that every day and you're tweaking it and cleaning up, you start to see how you can reduce those exposures over time.
And there's, it kills me. You go to the store and you very dutifully buy a stainless steel cup with a plastic straw. Okay.
Yeah, it's deceiving. And listen, I was that person too. I spent, after a year of working on my pans and cookware, I realized that I was still stirring my eggs in my stainless steel pan with a plastic spatula and used this, plastic strainer and things that are not expensive to really swap out, but just took a little moment of thinking. It's really sort of walking through this world and navigating in a really reasonable way what you touch, what you feel, what you put on your body, and what you cook with. Sure.
And a lot of it is so hidden because we just used it forever.
Yeah, and listen, things cost money. I am very, very conscious of people, and how they spend their money is really quite important to me. So high yield changes like a water filter that's really solid will save money on buying bottled water, which a lot of people feel compelled to do in this country for a variety of reasons, whether it's global warming and coastal issues or fires, but also because they may think that their water system is contaminated, like I just had in New Jersey not too long ago, where there was a smell coming from the public water system and many notices. So, yeah.
Well, it's that time for yet another station break. Dr. Cohen and I will be right back to continue our discussion. Please stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org.
One people, one nation, searching for the light. One people, one nation, coming from the stars. One people, one nation, to heal this earth of ours. I've been broken, shattered, cast to the wind. I am scattered upon the wind. I've been broken, shattered, cast to the wind. I am scattered upon the wind. I've been broken, shattered.
Why are so many people sick? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us discussing toxic chemicals and human health is Dr. Aly Cohen. Her website, smarthuman.com. Dr. Aly, I understand immune system disorders are on the rise. Can you give us some examples and where it's coming from?
Yeah, so as a rheumatologist, now practicing 22 years, I've kind of seen a lot of evolution of what it seems to be going on in human health, but particularly with autoimmune and immune disorders, which is an area that rheumatologists take care of. And so what I've noticed, and what is actually mirrored by epidemiologic studies, is that we have really an increasing rise in the new cases of immune and autoimmune disorders. So it's estimated about 7 to 14% of the human population is now having some type of experience with an immune or autoimmune disorder. There's about 80 or so known immune or autoimmune disorders in the medical literature. But again, arguably, there's lots of cases of clinical cases where people don't fit the criteria. And this is what I see quite a bit in my practice. They don't fit exact criteria for many of the autoimmune diseases, sort of checking the boxes, in terms of the symptoms and the lab work that supports it. So, we have a lot of gray zone. But what we do know is that the human body is really experiencing one of the greatest loads of exposure to many of the chemicals that we now know do in fact affect the immune system. And because of that, the body sort of lives at a low level inflammatory state unless there's a trigger, such as an infection on top of these exposures, or an insult of more chemicals coming in during a series of weeks or months. So the idea is that we are constantly exposed. The question is, how can we reduce that over time? We know that there's an explosion of these autoimmune diseases because the market for pharmaceutical therapies has exploded. And that's really occurred over the last, 20 years since I was in fellowship. And that makes sort of a sad statement for where we are in terms of our general pharmaceutical load, but also, the idea that we're not getting educated and patients are not learning what they could learn to reduce those flares and disease development.
I go to hot springs here in town to swim, actually, and they have this arthritis class, and it's packed. I mean, of all the classes, it's standing room only kind of thing. I think there's a huge increase in people suffering from arthritis, just regular old osteoarthritis. Is this related to the toxic chemical load?
So osteoarthritis, which is very common, is really an age-related type of arthritis where essentially you're wearing down some of the brake pads, so to speak, of some of our joints, and particularly the weight-bearing joints like the knees and the hips and the feet. Certainly people with occupational arthritis of the hands from, doing, manual types of activities, they might develop some osteoarthritis as well. And osteoarthritis is really quite common. We do wear out our tissues over time. We do live longer, but we might be living sicker with a variety of other conditions, such as hypertension and metabolic issues. But the idea is that there are a variety of arthritis, which is basically inflammation of the joints. The question is, what's the type of arthritis? And that's where rheumatologist really comes into play, and how we can better manage that through diet and lifestyle for sure.
So the rheumatoid arthritis it's of course a different one. Is it from made worse by the chemicals we're exposed to?
Yeah, we have a lot of data now to show that exposures to a variety of, chemicals, but also air pollution can contribute to increased rates of rheumatoid and lupus. We know that water contaminants that are common in public drinking systems now, PFAS chemicals, have been related to immune disorders. And rheumatoid arthritis is a autoimmune disease in the sense that it actually is your body's immune system attacking itself at the joint. Whereas, say, for instance, lupus is an autoimmune disease where the immune system is attacking other variety of places, including the kidney potentially, and including skin, joint, eyes, and brain. So, and MS, of course, is really focused on the immune system really attacking the brain itself. So these are autoimmune, the body attacking itself. It just depends on which organs and which structures. But essentially, the immune system has been triggered. What I'm hoping to share with patients and what people would read in this book is really, how do we reduce the triggers? How do we remove ourselves and remove the items in our life that are affecting our immune system? And then also, how do we plug in lifestyle, because I'm integrative medicine trained, how do we plug in appropriate sleep, and why does that matter to our health in terms of clearance of these chemicals? How do we add in clean drinking water so we can flush the body and help detoxify it? How do we add in clean food so that we don't affect our gut microbiome with pesticides and ultra-processed food chemicals? How do we manage stress so we manage the pH of our gut and let these microbes that serve us well do their job? So there's lots of things we can do, lifestyle, as well as thinking about how to remove the chemicals and even certain medications as well.
I know in our day and age, a lot of people have gut issues, okay? And isn't a fair amount of our immune system in our gut? And how much of those gut issues are because of chemicals?
Yeah, it's a great question. The gut is a really big component of immune system health. It's about 26 feet of bowel, even in children's, about 22 to 24 feet. Think of it like a tube from your mouth to your butt. Really, it's a tube. And on the inside lining of that tube is the microbiome. It's the kind of layer of microbes, viruses, yeast, molds, bacteria, mostly bacteria, that lines that inside portion of that tube from your mouth to your butt. And the idea is that, and this is a simplistic way of explaining it, of course, but essentially that interior lining has been with us for millions of years. And we just started to pay attention to its importance only about 20, 25, 30 years ago. And now we know that lining is so critical, the integrity of that lining, the composition of those microbes, the balance, maintaining them and keeping them healthy actually really serves the human body well, because they protect what goes across that tube into the human body through the bloodstream, which might trigger the immune system. There's also a gut-brain connection, which is vitally important for mental health improvement. It's also really important for managing any of the connection between the gut and the brain that contributes to things like depression and anxiety. But also things like schizophrenia and other mental health disorders. So the gut is pretty darn important to the immune system and also to the brain. So it's a great place to start. And I talk a lot about that in Detoxify.
So the speaking of the brain, how do all these chemicals affect the brain? I mean, I know there's a blood-brain barrier, but it seems like some things are moving beyond it.
How do we protect it? Well, we can protect it really by removing, again, the things we dump into our gut. And that really means, thinking more clearly, thinking more responsibly, maybe even having greater access to the foods that are cleaner without pesticides and which really knock off good guys, right? USDA organic, if it's accessible, which it should be across the U.S. I mean, every big box supermarket now carries their own frozen organic produce. And I really encourage people to look through the frozen sections of their big box stores, because it's a very lucrative business, and it makes it, it sort of democratizes the idea that we can get clean food. It's frozen. We do want to move it into a glass or stainless steel container to heat it. We never want to heat up plastic in a microwave or an oven. But the idea is that those USDA organic products have value. It's pretty much the only recognition in our system of food and everything we use that actually has teeth. And so I do encourage that. And that way the gut stays a little healthier, the water certainly. And then managing, again, stress, which changes the gut lining and the gut vulnerability, and managing medications and being judicious about what people are taking and if they need it. So those are all really good things to keep the gut in good health.
So one thing we haven't covered so far is the increase of EMFs that we're living with. I mean, I remember when I was, in my teens, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have, any of the stuff that we now have commonplace. How much is the EMF pollution affecting us?
That's a great question. So as we're moving into 5G, which is fifth generation of our toys, which is essentially cell phones and Wi-Fi technology, we do have some additional risks that we have to pay attention to. 5G technology versus, say, 4G or 3G has more penetration into some of the homes and the buildings. It goes through thicker materials. So generally speaking, we're going to have more cell towers set up. What really is an issue for human health is that we're going to have, on average, more radiation exposure, similar to what would be in a microwave, but we don't live in a microwave. Or I should say we now live more in a microwave, but in a microwave, we stand back and it's protected by those thick walls, kind of like a Faraday box, if someone who's listening is into science. But in real life, we are exposed to those radiation signals between our phones and technology and Wi-Fi towers. So there's lots of things we can do to reduce exposure to even EMF. And that includes understanding how to use your phone safely, putting it on airplane mode when you don't need it, keeping it away from the body, which creates distance and also exponentially reduces exposure to radiation. Cases don't typically work. They actually make it sometimes worse because really the signal is trying to find its way around that case and it can rev up the signal. So there's lots of gimmicks out there that I warn people to stay away from. Ideally, it's how you use your phone and your cell phone technology and keeping computers off of your pelvis like my kids and all their friends do. You want to keep all of that away from your body and put it on a table.
They have these grounding mats. Are those helpful?
You know, I really couldn't tell you specifically how they work and whether they are effective. There's so many gimmicks. We do know that there's even boards that you can do, especially like in the pregnancy world where you want to have a computer, but you don't want to really, you shouldn't be sitting it on your belly, although it makes for a nice table. There are, new toys that are out there to protect the belly from radiation, even blankets and such. But essentially, if you just move these toys away from touching your body and further away as possible as you can get, you really can solve a lot of that exposure, direct exposure issues. So yeah, I mean, there's things we can do, but I think we need to be thinking, more broadly and even turning off Wi-Fi at night, supporting measures to reduce Wi-Fi in schools where kids really don't need it. So that's what I kind of move people to think about.
It's certainly hard to get away from because it's everywhere.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and we live in a world where you can't really function. Even myself as an educator, I'm on social media all the time and posting and, but what, I tell my kids who are teenagers and I say, please take that out of your front pocket, their phones. I say, I want to become a grandmother one day because we know
exactly. Yeah.
reductions in sperm count and quality. And so these are the messages that you just want to share.
Well, it's again time for another station break. Please stay with us as Dr. Cohen and I continue to explore healthy living in a toxic world. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org.
One people, one nation, searching for the light. One people, one nation, coming from the stars. One people, one nation, to heal this earth of ours. Brilliant feathers of an unearthly hue glide by on the edge of his dream. A whisper of touch, an unheard song. Whose bird takes flight, prompted by his broken.
I can't breathe. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're continuing our discussion with Dr. Aly Cohen. Her website, thesmarthuman.com. Dr. Aly, we haven't talked about air yet, and I think it's probably part of the equation. How many pollutants are going into the air, and how are they impacting us?
Yeah, so pollutants in the air are kind of a little tricky because we have stuff that we actually do to ourselves, right? Like we bring in lots of chemicals for cleaning and air fresheners and incense and candles and fragrances that we spray on our body in our personal care. And those have lots of different chemicals that we now know to be harmful, whether they're endocrine disruptors or they're immune disrupting chemicals, as I've coined them, IDCs. Either way, we want to be very cognizant of fragrance, for instance. Phthalates are the classic group of compounds that are associated with fragrance. And phthalates last for a very long time because people want those fragrances to last on the shelf and on our bodies. But phthalates are known to have effects with human hormones as endocrine disruptors and the immune system. So that's one area of air pollution, you could argue, that we can work on. And certainly there are options out there for better choices and even making your own, which we have as do-it-yourself recipes in the book. But I would also argue there's things that we can't control, maybe things that are in our immediate air quality outside our home, whether it's fires, whether you live in a busy city with lots of combustion. And in that case, we want to be thinking about, how do we protect the air from coming into our homes with an air filter? How do we bring in more plants? Plants do a wonderful job of cleaning airspace, as long as you have enough in terms of the ratio of the square footage. And then when you go into your car, you can often get a filtration system for your car and manage with masks if you need to in those certain situations. So there's lots of things we can do, particularly in the places we can control, like our home and our workplace.
There's, I know personally, I've experienced when a house is just built or a new carpet is put in or new furniture is purchased, they tend to what I've heard called gas off. Would you speak to that a little bit, please?
Yeah, in fact, that's true. These are industrial chemicals. We all love that new car smell. Well, there's, comes along with that new car smell. It's recently manufactured materials, synthetic materials that are off-gassing because there are some volatile organic compounds coming from some of those materials. And so eventually that smell wears off. Same is true for cleaning, going to a dry cleaner. There's off-gassing of dry cleaning, which I certainly recommend to put into a separate room, separate building, even in the garage, but really trying to keep it out of your home airspace. And of course, upstream is trying to find materials to purchase and clean that don't require dry cleaning. But essentially, off-gassing comes from a world of synthetic chemicals, and that we do tend to smell them. And they're kind of, odorous. And so when you smell something unusual, it usually means that it's not a natural smell. Certainly all natural doesn't have much weight in the product market. So we want to be very careful about how we vet our candles, incense, and things like that.
I know even paints and stuff. You can find, or at least you used to be able to find them that are less toxic. They don't work as well probably, but can't you find less toxic materials for your home?
Yeah, and actually that's been my sort of 10-year mission as I've been walking through a life with young kids and pets and busy work hours and a space in my office that I need to keep clean, is that you can find hacks for a lot of this stuff that we think we couldn't. And you can find things that work. And over the years, the market has gotten much better at creating products that are vetted, and I share those resources again in Detoxify, but you really want to find resources where the people managing those websites for nonstick clothing, or materials and cookware and cosmetics, personal care, where they are manning it in a way that they're keeping updates on any changes to the product lines. And so when I share those resources, I'm sharing, organizations that really take this very seriously and do a very good job of that work. And it's evergreen because they're managing it. So that's another really big piece to think about, is brands have variation even within the products that they sell. So you want to be thinking about companies that do the testing regularly and keep it up to date.
So who's the most at risk for health issues resulting from toxic chemicals and EMFs?
Well, that's another wonderful question, because we do know that there are, changes in risk by even age group. We know that certainly during pregnancy tends to be one of the most vulnerable times for a fetus. And we know that the blood of the mom generally crosses over through the placenta to a fetus. And unfortunately, what we thought as being so protective as the placenta, it really is not as protective, at least to many, many classes of synthetic chemicals that we thought. So really, it's not to blame moms. It's not to scare moms. I'm very much about you do better when you know better. But we should be teaching our healthcare providers about this topic, and OB-GYNs and nurse practitioners and midwives, that cleaning up your body if you can before you get pregnant, and certainly if you can consider that a priority during pregnancy, will be much better in terms of exposures for a growing fetus. When you talk about children have a whole set of toys that they like and baby products. And there are people that are vetting those out for chemicals that may be harmful. And again, it's a matter of choice, not necessarily a matter of cost. And when you talk about teenagers use the most personal care products in a 24-hour period than any other demographic. I've done research on this from Princeton High School, and I even did a TED Talk talking about that research on that. And what we now know is that because they are teaming with hormones and they use the most products that affect potentially hormones in the immune system, that's another great demographic to hit up for education.
And speaking of which, I understand that you work with schools and with children in some regard to try to educate them about this.
Yeah, that's really been my ongoing goal. I've been, distracted with books here and there and curriculum for physicians, believe it or not. 3 programs trying to teach doctors that have graduated through med schools and have been practicing for a while who want to learn this material. But I've really felt and always have that the best way to get some of this information to people so that they can live long, healthy lives or manage disease much better is to get it into the hands of young people who are going to make those changes that will stick throughout their lifetime. So that has been a goal, is to create national curriculum to integrate into high schools on environmental health.
Well, Dr. Aly, it's that time in the show when I get to ask you, what is your mission?
My mission is to keep my family and the families of the people I talk to and share information with healthy. I've been a doctor for a long time, and I really like seeing healthy people doing well, managing chronic illness, managing their cancers in remission, just really doing better and not coming down with illnesses that they should really never have at young ages and with no family history. So my mission is to keep people healthy.
That's a beautiful mission, and it's a wonderful way to approach it because this is a hidden problem. It has been for years, and having it come out, I think, is the first step, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Awareness. And thank you, Gwilda, for shedding light on this topic. I really do appreciate you having me on to share.
Oh, that's wonderful. So what portion of illness in the U.S. are attributable to toxic chemicals and EMFs?
Well, it's hard to say from human studies because we are always being bombarded by chemicals, throughout a lifetime, right? I went to summer camp and slept on a really gross mattress. Did I get exposure during that moment or that month or 2 months of camp every summer that affected my later risk of developing any number of diseases? So humans are hard to study, but animals are much easier to study. And so some of the most really damning kind of evidence comes from some of the best animal-based studies. And that way we can control what they eat, what they breathe, and we can kind of identify how chemicals can work in these in rodents and mice. But we also have epidemiologic studies from farm workers, migrant farm workers, people who are forced to be in higher exposure occupations of a variety of, occupations. And we can look to see if those exposures, which are allowable from the OSHA regulations, we can see whether or not they play into much higher levels, rates of various diseases. So we have a lot to go on, and this book draws on it.
So the load that we're getting, okay, it occurs to me that we come in toxic because our mothers are one big toxic soup. And we have to get everything we get from her. Then we come in and we start using a baby bottle, and it goes on and on and on. I'm talking about us that before it was banned. So right now we're kind of a big soup of toxicity. What do you think is the best way to cleanse and the quickest way to cleanse without compromising your health?
Yeah, so again, I test a lot of people, and when people change behaviors, it's remarkable the levels that go down, and not everyone needs to test to be convinced of that. I want people to save their money, but if there's any one message, it's really that we are just surrounded by too many products. In the US, because there's so little or no regulation, one of the number one things is to really think about what you need, and if you need to have a variety of solvents in your garage and bug sprays and pesticides in your closet, and makeup that I got for free as samples back in the day and emptied a whole drawer out and threw it away, or plug in air fresheners. Do we need all of these chemicals? Because even if you don't know what's exactly in them, because they're proprietary, you know that they can't have great things in them anyway, because there's no regulation. So unless you're vetting, which is not hard to do, again, very easy to do. I have my kids doing it. The high school students can do it. If you're vetting products, you can immediately find better choices. And that's the tools that we need, is get rid of the bad, add in nutrition, add in clean products, clean with water that's vetted and that's filtered. And that's how you start to kind of clean up our cells and our bodies.
So you're not necessarily advocating going on a great big cleanse and fasting and enemas and all that rigmarole?
No, it's interesting. I mean, I've done fasting. Intermittent fasting is really good from a calorie perspective anthropologically because it resets a lot of our cells. Of course, you have to be healthy enough to do it. You have to be smart about taking on a fast of sorts. But, generally speaking, my message to everyone I teach, everyone I post, all the feeds I post on for The Smart Human and even in the books I write, is that we should be really aiming for progress, 80-20. Not going for perfection, because then we lose a lot of our energy. We get restricted in our behaviors. We really want to be thinking about big ticket items, doing this over time. It's a journey, and anything too aggressive usually can be either harmful or it just won't stick. So when it's done slowly, carefully, and thoughtfully, I've seen so much more benefits individually than I have when people do dramatic things. Now, that being said, dramatic, cleanses where you take away some harmful things like alcohol, regular drinking of alcohol, smoking, lower your meat intake, red meat, maybe you
Well, Dr. Aly, unfortunately, we're out of time.
Bummer.
Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Gwilda. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Our guest this hour has been Dr. Aly Cohen, the author of 3 books. Her latest, Detoxify, the everyday toxins harming your immune system and how to defend against them. This has been Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. Join us next time as this mission will continue, bringing information, resources, and support to our evolving world.
Searching for the light. One people, one nation. Coming from the stars. One people, one nation. To heal this earth of ours. Our gracious Mother Earth. Our Father